Oh, that's good because I am dying. I'm on this very warm. You can either sit on this side or you can go around the other side of the door and get on the other side, wherever works. Folks, we'll get started here shortly. We still have people coming in. Chelsea's very popular tonight.
Diary cover to cover. I'm just going to say, something we didn't mention.
We still have somebody coming in. There's people still coming in.
At first I was like, can I do it? Like, I'm sure that I can take out of it.
People enjoy coming
Oh yeah, I'm fine. I've got my young eyes.
Okay, good.
Right?
Mine are getting older and older.
A little tired. It's okay.
Yeah, you were kind of
See how they Howdy, folks. Can you hear me okay? No? How about now? Is it better? Can you hear me? Okay. I just want to welcome everybody for coming and joining us here for Chelsea's presentation. My name is Donna Brandelli. I'm a member of the church, and I'm the chairperson of our 350th committee. We're celebrating our 350th anniversary this year. So thank you for joining us here. This is one in a series of programs that we've been offering free to the community on the first Sunday of every month. We started doing this in July, our programs. We had a carnival here in June to celebrate our 350th anniversary and being part of the community. The programs are always here on the first Sunday of the month at 4:30. So if you want to sign up, there's a sign-up list out here. Some of you may have gotten reminder notices. We try to email people out to remind them. There's notices going out on Facebook. They're always on our website, which is fcc.org, I believe. Check the First Congregational Church as well for our presentation schedule, in case you don't get the notice or you don't get the Facebook advertisement. We want to see as many people enjoying our programs as possible, and we are trying to do a variety of programs. If you want to sign in, there's sign-up sheets on every table out there in the entryway. Donation jar if you'd like to donate. Everything is free. The donations are used for us to help bring in more presentations along the way. We're having such a good response that we are thinking about continuing doing this presentation past our June deadline, or the end of our 350th into our 351st year. So if anybody knows of someone that might want to do a presentation, or you have an idea, please contact one of us and let us know. We'd love to contact them and see if they're interested in doing something and doing something for our community. Obviously, everything that we do is based on volunteers. So anybody that's here from the 350 committee? I don't see it. There's Norm, Marilyn, Susan, Barbara. I know you're here, Barbara. Where are you? There you go. So I want, Nick is upstairs. He's doing our videotaping. So please thank everybody. Please give me a round of applause for everybody. Obviously, none of this happens without volunteers, as everybody knows. Just a few housekeeping. This is an old building. It was put here in 1874, so there is no running water or plumbing. So if anyone needs to use the restroom, you need to go across the way into the white building there, go in the single door with a wreath on it, hit the wall, make a left. The women's room is on the right-hand side. The men's or family restroom is on the left-hand side. We'll also have some refreshments after the presentation, so please come over there, and we're going to do something really funky and old. It's called conversation. Face-to-face, talking to people that you've maybe never have met before, or someone that you want to get to know a little bit better. We're going to try it. We're going to see how it works, okay? As an introduction, so I want to introduce Chelsea. Many of you may know Chelsea from historic Stonington. Used to be the Stonington Historical Society. She's the library director of the Stonington Historical Society, or Historic Stonington. She gives presentations and works with school children and the community. She's coordinated several of the programs hosted by the Historic Stonington. And I've been privileged to meet Chelsea when she first started working at the library. I volunteer over at the library, so I've had the privilege of knowing her how many years now?
Almost 8.
Holy cow, really?
Yeah.
Wow, didn't even know I've been there that long. It's fun, so if you need to volunteer, really, you ought to go over there, because I don't know, I've been there 8 years. This is great. And as with any historic organization, it runs on volunteers, it runs on donations, and it's low budgets and low supply. So please, if you can help out and you like to do this stuff, get hold of Chelsea, get hold of any of the people over there. They're wonderful people. I personally look forward to this presentation. It looks like we have a lot of women here, so that's really nice to see. One of my 4 times great-grandfathers was a sailor who traveled around the world. Unfortunately, I can't find a diary that his wife wrote. I don't think she rode around with him, which I'm kind of interested to see what goes on from a woman's perspective in all of this. With that, I want to turn this over to Chelsea and let her share her knowledge on what's been going on and what the work that she's done.
All right, I'm going to wear the mic, but I have a big voice. Does everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Also, I would just like to say thank you all so much for inviting me here and making me feel so welcome. I'm really excited to give this talk today. And I am a firm believer that passion is contagious, so I'm hoping that some of you will catch my enthusiasm today as we talk about the Sister Sailors of Stonington. So by way of a short introduction and kind of some context for how this talk is going to go today, I am the library director at Historic Stonington. All of you are welcome to come by anytime and see me at the Woolworth Library. It's a really fun place to dig into any sort of history you might be interested in. Family genealogies, house histories, the women who sailed from Stonington, right, just to name a few. So today, in my talk, there isn't really a central thesis that I want you to all leave here with. My main goal is to humanize these women to us in our modern lives and show you really how modern they were for their time, and also to kind of give us the frame of reference to look through when we talk about history and we're talking about our ancestors or even people who might not be related to us, right? Just these historical figures. I think it's really important to humanize them, to make them more accessible, and that makes the lessons that they have to teach us that much easier for us to understand with a modern sensibility. All right? So we are going to do a little context in the beginning because I want everyone to have the same sort of knowledge base before we jump on board with the women. And then I am going to walk you through 3 different ladies and their experiences on board ship from their diaries. Okay. Also a disclaimer, I am not a sailor. I've been on a sailboat once, and it was great. I get it. I know why people have them, but I cannot explain to you types of rigging, those sorts of things, and really that's not the point, right? The other thing I would like to say is that I think I'm really pleased to see so many women here, and I think you'll find a lot of this very relatable, and if you don't, maybe it will give you some perspective and ways to better understand them. Okay. The main 3 things that you are going to learn about these women are determination, bravery, and sacrifice. Okay? So let's start. I'm going to speak first about a woman named Abby Jane Morrell. Now, she is not from Stonington, but she's important when we talk about context. So Abby Jane was born in New York in 1809. Her father had been a master of a ship out of New Orleans called the Very PC Indian Hunter. And this is kind of the world she grew up in New Orleans. Later on in 1824, so she's just about 15-ish, she marries a distant cousin, Benjamin Morrell. And she is determined to accompany her husband on his first voyage after they're married, which she is not successful in. He leaves without her. A few years later, he comes back and she said, I'm going on this voyage with you. And she spends a week crying before he finally says, okay, enough. You can come along for Pete's sake. So at this time, she has a little boy. And she is so determined to go with her husband, she leaves her child with her mother in New York, not knowing if she will ever return to see this child again, right, with or without her husband. And they get onto the ship Antarctic and sail around the world from 1829 to 1831. During that time, they are visiting places like the Cape Verde Islands, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Liberia, and South Africa. Now imagine you've never seen any place even remotely close to that, right? Maybe New Orleans is a little bit warm, but I mean, you're really talking about the far edges of the world in 1829. Many of these maps aren't really completed yet, or you're relying on old maps to get you to these places. So Abby Jane also keeps journals of her travels, and these are later ghostwritten by a man named Samuel Knapp and published under as it's published in 1833. We're going to read some more quotes from that later, but I just wanted you to get an idea of Abby Jane's kind of situation. All right. Now, our first Stonington lady, and really the person who I kind of consider my hero of this talk, is Mary Birch Brewster. She's born in Stonington, the 6th of 7 children to her parents, but unfortunately Mary's mother dies when she's just 5 years old. Now, her father is a carpenter and says, I can't support 7 children without a wife, right? That's especially in this time period. So Mary and some of her siblings are raised by a foster family, the Reverend Robert Bottom and his wife Malvina. Later on, she marries William Brewster, and who is a whaling captain. He comes from a whaling family. His brothers are also involved in the whaling trade. And after 5 years of marriage, they had spent only 5 months together. Right? That's difficult, even in a modern time. So she describes it as, "Oh, what is there which will fill this aching void? Nothing but the presence of the dear object of my heart and affections. He truly is the bright star of my affections, the center of all my thoughts." It's so romantic. Oh my God. After 5 months together? Like, girl. Right? So after a lot of thought, Mary decides, I'm going with him, right? I'm done with this separation. We're going to do it together. But apparently, this was not well-received news by her immediate community. Her adopted mother told her in no uncertain terms that she would never speak to her again if she went. This is from Mary's diary. "She who has extended a mother's love and watchfulness over me said her consent would never be given. In no way would she assist me, and if I left her, she thought me very ungrateful. And lastly, though not least, her house would never be a home for me again if I insisted in coming. Well, thank heaven it is all past, and I am on board of the good ship Tiger and with my dear husband." Not an idle threat either. Now, the last of the ladies we're going to talk about today is Sarah Fanning. Sarah Fanning is actually Captain Nathaniel Brown Palmer's niece. This is his sister Juliet's daughter. You know what I mean. So she's actually born in Stonington in 1825, but she is unfortunately orphaned by the time she is 18. Her father dies when she's quite young, and then her mother dies of malaria in 1845. She is looked after by family in New York and in Stonington, and in New Orleans, where her family had also lived, and there's mercantile efforts there as well in the Palmer family. So she's kind of getting bounced around between relatives. She is an incredibly smart woman for her age and for her time, which we will talk about a little bit later. She goes on board of the Chinese clipper ship Huqua, which was designed by her uncle in 1846 with her Uncle Nat and her Aunt Eliza, which is Nat's wife. Okay, so we've met our 3 characters here. Let's talk about what's Stonington like at this point in time. You've got 2 maps up here on the screen. So this map, this is 1827. This was done by an engineer who was kind of surveying the town in order to build the inner breakwater here, which was built in 1828. So you can see primarily, right, it's largely undeveloped in this upper area, mostly farmland. You've got some rope walks, these long skinny buildings here, but it's mostly open, okay? On the right, this is 1851. Look how the town has grown in just that short amount of time. Here are your rope walks, just to kind of center you again. Here's your inner breakwater after it's constructed. But look at the congestion in this center bit of town here, and it's even spread to this upper area as well around the Wattawannock Hotel. Now, a lot of this growth we can attribute to the arrival of the railroad, right? So the Stonington's Railroad is finished around 1837, and this drastically changes the town. But the other thing to keep in mind in terms of economy is we have sealing going on pretty early, 1820s. By the time we're getting into whaling in the 1830s and 40s, the seal population has been largely decimated by all of our kind of over-hunting. So people made fortunes in sealing. Some of those same people are now transferring that fund into whaling, but there's a lot of money to be made in whaling, and off of the railroad, obviously, as you can see. So this is all kind of happening, this growth and development is all happening within the time that we're talking about here. So Abby Jane Morrell is kind of the earlier end, but Mary Brewster and Sarah Fanning are sailing within a year of each other, in the mid-1840s. So they're kind of more towards this end of Stonington, okay? Now, let's talk about what an average woman's day looks like in the 19th century. Because you need to understand what their daily life is like to understand why they would want to go jump on a boat and sail around for a few years with a bunch of men they don't know and their husbands. Okay, so you can see our list up here. This is just a general overview. So cooking. Okay, what does meal prep look for an entire family when you don't have a Cuisinart or a oven or a stovetop necessarily, right? So you're meal prepping for the entire family, multiple meals a day from scratch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as prep work like canning and preserving food for the hard months of winter. They would be cleaning, scrubbing and sweeping floors, doing dishes without running water, no pre-bottled soap, right? This is all labor-intensive work. Laundry, boiling water, hand washing your garments and hanging them out to dry. You'd have to sew. Most of your clothes, almost all of your clothes, would probably be handmade. So you would be making new garments, mending garments, altering things, maybe spinning wool for later knitting projects. Childcare, huge part of this, especially when we're talking 19th century, families were large. So you're going to spend your time bathing the children, teaching them, playing with them, especially as, like I said, the births were numerous. You would also be tending to the garden and any livestock, right? This is just what you are expected to do. Your husband's got his own list of things to do. So that could be things like raising chickens, feeding pigs. You could keep a garden for medicinal plants or for raising vegetables for you. Of course, depending on sort of your economic status and where you were in town, maybe this would have been a larger part of your day, right? So obviously the people living in this part of town would have had a very different relationship with livestock and the garden than the people living in Stonington Borough, right? The other thing is attending religious services and socializing. Very important. An important aspect of womanhood in the 19th century is being an excellent hostess and taking pride in your home, right? You want people to come and feel comfortable there. Is it a hospitable place? Is it clean? Are you proud to have people enter your home? Religion is also a major aspect of life at this time. It offered not only a moral compass and beliefs to get you through the hardships of life, like early death, illnesses, the loss of a child, things like that. And just to reiterate, that class is kind of an indicator here in terms of what a woman would have accomplished during the day. Eliza and maybe Sarah, being on the wealthier end of the women we're talking about, would most likely have employed domestic servants in the Palmer House and other places. So they would have had more hands helping, right? As opposed to someone like Mary or, well, Abby, I'm sure was wealthy after her book came out. Okay, so let's talk about religion and about their world. What churches did they belong to? And what are they hearing when they go to Mass? Why is religion so important to these women? So you can see here, everyone's favorite. This is where we are right now. Road Church. And this is the first Baptist church that was in Stonington on Water Street. So this photograph is actually taken on the corner of High Street. We're looking down. You would recognize this house. Indulge is like over here. So Mary Brewster is a member of the Baptist church. Nat and Eliza were married in the Road Church, and then later they became members of Calvary Church, but it's not constructed until 1848. So during the American Revolution, there was a sort of celebration of individual freedoms, right, and representative government, which challenged the notion of a single state-supported religion. In the same period, you have increasing numbers of men and women who grow convinced that they could open themselves to salvation through their own efforts by turning to free will, or what's called Arminian theology. I'm no expert in religious history. They rejected the doctrine of total and helpless depravity that defined Orthodox Calvinism, and they instead kind of turned to this optimism about humankind's ability to improve itself. And the world lay at the heart of the explosion of religious revivalism at the turn of the 19th century, which historians refer to as the Second Great Awakening. Okay, we're going to see this sort of play out through the diaries. I promise this will make sense when we get into the meat of it. So the most significant effect in terms of this relationship of the Second Great Awakening was the way in which it helped Americans to connect with one another in a very expanding and mobile society. Men and women founded countless reform associations and put into practice the evangelical mission of the awakening. Revivalism also inspired utopian societies whose members sought to perfect the world through reforming living arrangements, diets, and sexual practices. So Mary Brewster is a member of the Stonington Baptist Church. In this photograph, it's from 1933 on the right there. The other big thing to talk about in this time period, and that the women mention in their diaries, are missionaries. So the missionaries are found basically throughout the world by this time in the 1840s. They've made it to China, they're in the Fiji Islands, they're in Hawaii, they're in South America, they're basically anywhere you could throw a dart and hit the map. So Mary Brewster visits with a large number of missionaries when she is left over winter in Hawaii by her husband. And Sarah has encountered missionaries in China, most definitely. So missionary work gave women an outlet to live a different sort of life in service to God at this time. Many were very eager to teach, and forgive my quotation here, the heathen populations. But many women felt that they needed to be married before arriving at their destined location. And that meant sometimes you had to marry a complete stranger in order to get the work done and to get where you needed to go and be acceptable in the white community when you arrived. There are a number of women who are registered as married and they were introduced to their husbands like a week before and now going, okay, now the two of you are married, get on this boat and hopefully in a year you'll be in Hawaii. Good luck. Right? That's really stressful. So they were often able to teach young girls once they arrived in their location until they became pregnant, at which time they were expected to recenter their lives to their own children and to stop teaching. So male missionaries were busy writing books, making translations, bringing people into Christianity, and their wives were eager to be doing the same things, but they didn't have the time, the health, or the energy after working with their own children. One woman wrote home to her brother in 1836 saying, quote, "Husband tries to comfort me by saying, I may be raising missionaries who will do so much more than I could. If it is my duty to raise a family, it is my duty to do so cheerfully. Oh, to be a better missionary wife and mother." So what's going on with whaling in the 1840s? What is that like? So I took some, just to get an idea, this is more like facts and figures for you and your brains here. Between 1832 and 1862, Mystic had 28 whaling vessels. Those 28 vessels took 11,660 barrels of sperm oil, valued at nearly $385,000. 138,000 barrels of whale oil, worth approximately $1,935,000, and 887,000 pounds of whalebone, worth slightly over $357,000. So that's a total gross value, thank you, of just over $2.6 million, or roughly $90,000 for each year of activity. That's a lot of money in this time period, right? This is life-changing money, right? So whaling is also responsible for introducing the Portuguese community to Stonington, which many people don't know. Crews would sail out of Mystic or Stonington to go a whaling and land in the Azores and pick up these very well-seasoned fishermen who knew their way around whaling and all sorts of fishing, really. And those men would sail with the crew for the rest of the trip, and some of them decided to stay on board ship and come back to Stonington around 1840, and that's kind of when our Portuguese population arrives in town, and it's from whaling. Okay. As you can see here, right, huge fortunes are made, and they're using all of these goods for whale lamps in your home. You would be using, things for corsets and candles. All right. So why on earth would these women go whaling? My gosh, it sounds awful. Well, you've got a few things to talk about here. The love and separation that we talked about, that Mary was feeling so early in her life. I mean, 5 years, you've seen your husband for 5 months. What must that feel like? No hope of having children on a schedule like that, just saying, which is another problem, which you see in other places. Yeah, that first quote is what I read to you earlier. You also have a sort of fear of the unknown, not necessarily of death, because their religion is so strong, there's no fear of what happens after they die, more a matter of, am I ready? But there is a certain level of fear, I mean, in terms of the danger that you're putting yourself in, right? It's an extremely dangerous profession at the time. And it also provided women a way to adventure, right? I mean, you do have to go with your husband, so it's not a girl's trip, but it's a way for you to get out of New England. I mean, Mary Brewster had never been out of New England in her life, and now she's on a ship around the world. I mean, can you imagine what that would do for you, for your perspective as a person? Life-changing. So what's it actually like on a whale ship? Ladies and gentlemen, it's not pleasant. It seems quite romantic with modern eyes, but it is definitely not. This is a really dangerous job, right? You have whaling to do. There are storms. There are injuries. You could die of seasickness. Just a quick show of hands. Has anyone in here been seasick? Yeah, you want to die. It's terrible, right? So let's see, if you get hurt, there's typically not a doctor on board the ship. They just assign that job to someone who seems competent. Whether or not that's true remains to be seen. Mary actually winds up becoming a nurse on board ship for the crew. And some ships would actually charge you from your wages if you were injured and you needed to be tended to on board. They would charge your wages for the medical help that you received. And Mary is very clear in her diary and says, none of these men will be charged for the nursing I give them. The crew members could be crushed by huge pieces of the whale itself as they are breaking it down. You could be crushed between the edge of the ship and a piece of the blubber. You could slip on deck, which is covered in whale oil, and go overboard. Sharks are often coming to chew at the whale carcass as it is tied alongside the ship. Some of these men can't swim. I mean, could you imagine? You're signing up for 3 to 5 years on board ship. Most of the crew of the Tiger actually didn't sign up. They were dragged in from bars and things like that to round out the crew. Sort of a nasty surprise for most of them. You could be severely wounded by the whales themselves in the chase, right? They could breach up under your boat as you're going, which happens to another man on board Mary's ship. He's hit kind of in the side of the head by a fin as it goes by, and that's the end of him, right? Right into the waves. There's also sort of the intemperance and violence, which goes along with having many men who were taken off of what they called sprees at the time, which is basically, what do they call that now? A bender, okay? That's the word I was looking for. So these men, intemperance is not really a thing on board ships. Some captains will say, I don't want any of you drinking, and then when they hit their first port, most people are gone. And violence on board ship can also become a really serious thing. I mean, you're in close quarters with people for a long time, right? We've all had coworkers we might not love. Imagine you have to live with them. You have to bunk with them for 5 years. Get me out of here. The food, right? Also not great. Mary talks about this on board ship. They were just grabbing people to fill out the crew, so they didn't have a designated cook. So they said, can you cook? And he said, sure. And so they put him in the kitchen, and it turned out he couldn't cook. So the captain gets mad. They put another guy in there. Well, he can't cook either. So they wind up going back to the first guy. But there's a lot of problems between the captain and the cook through the rest of the voyage, right? The bread can get weevily. I refrained from putting a picture of the weevil ship tack up there because it's gross. But I mean, you're often thinking about the storage of this food. It has to last you so long, and we don't have refrigeration on board these ships, right? There's salt pork, there's hardtack, things like this. And honestly, a lot of the food goes bad because of poor storage, poor ventilation, poor drainage. You also have to contend with cramped living conditions and a high risk of death from disease or misadventure. So they needed to consume a lot of calories on board to meet the demands of the hard work that they're doing. 12-hour days in all kinds of weather. I mean, you're really sailing around the world. When you go around Cape Horn, it is quite cold and stormy. And then here you find yourself in California. That's a very different climate, right? So, I mean, the adjustment of that and the time you're spending on deck, food is extremely important. And that can often lead to mutinies or disagreements with the captain and officers if the men feel they're not getting what they should be eating. Now, I have to talk about one more thing. I can't believe I'm going to do it in church. So we have to talk about prostitution a little bit. So there's some quotes in here I might not read. You can take, all right, so listen, pastor said it's okay. So there is a lot of prostitution going on in the Pacific in this time period. And that's for a variety of reasons, and I think also needs to kind of be taken with a grain of salt, because there are people at the time who are thinking it's a cultural thing, and these women obviously need the Lord because they are just giving it away to whoever sails into port in exchange for goods that the sailors have, like cloth and clothing, right? They start to see that as kind of a mark of wealth, which is so different from their own indigenous culture. But there's also an aspect to that that implies that it is always, that the women are always willing participants, and that is not the case in every instance. So just something to keep in mind. But there is a sort of tradition of these New England whale fishers who purposely don't bring their wives on board because they have what they call season wives, which they pick up on various islands, and who would remain on board ship for a few months at a time. So just real quick. In 1850, a Connecticut whale ship, the Cavalier, captained by a man named Dexter, he outrivaled his men in promiscuity, okay? He takes some ladies into his cabin. When he tires of them, he passes them down to the officers, and when the officers are tired, they pass them down to the crew. Well, before you know it, everyone on board had syphilis. That's hard to explain when you get home to your Puritan wife, right? But for every one of those captains, there are captains who are distraught to be separated from their wives and their family. They're writing letters going, I just ran into the ship Tiger from Stonington, and Mrs. Brewster was on board, and you can see other women are doing this, and I'd love to have you with me, right? So there are a good number of women who go from New England into the whale fishery with their husbands, most likely sort of spurred on by Miss Abby Jane Morrell. All right. Oh. Have I been touching this the whole time? Yeah. Oh my God, I did? Yeah. Okay. Well, good. Look, here we are. Oh no. Sorry. Listen, I'm supposed to be like a digital native. All right, let's talk about Abby Jane Morrell's experiences. So I want to put this into contrast with the other two ladies who come after her, because Abby Jane's narrative, as we'll call it, the title is up here, it has this nice long, catchy title, may have been tainted a bit, right? She has a male ghostwriter, because who would buy a book written by a woman in 1833? And he helps her to kind of edit and put things in perspective. But you also can sort of sense that, as with anything that's written as a sort of narrative like this, you have to be able to trust your narrator, right? And there are some instances in Abby Jane's book where you have to go, do I really think that happened? right? As an example, she talks about when she's leaving Hawaii, she gets back on board of the Antarctic, and the crew is so excited to see her, they do a 3 cheers for her. And then all the British ships nearby heard the cheer and go, "That's for Miss Morell," and they give 3 cheers. And then the Hawaiian Islanders can hear all the ships doing their 3 cheers, and they give her 3 cheers. And then they can sail out of Hawaii. No. But we have some other things in here. So Abby Jane is very young when she gets married. This is what she writes on the separation of her and her husband. "I knew when I married him that I was to be the wife of a seafaring man, but it was impossible for me to realize the distress of separation. Only a little month had passed away when my husband proposed to sail, and on the 18th of July, this dreadful separation took place. I was calm, for it was a matter of duty and necessity, but no one who has not felt them can tell the pangs of such a separation. A bride of 15 to see her husband depart for such a length of time requires more or less than the fortitude of woman. He left me, and for many nights my dreams were of him on a boundless ocean, tossed by storms or engulfed in the deep. To these gradually succeeded dreams of his being wrecked on desolate islands and subject to the violence of savage men. My feelings were probably the same as every good wife experiences when her spouse has left her for distant lands, but I was so young, and that I had never run over in my mind anything of this kind before, and all was as new as distressing. At another time, he would, in my imagination, be lying on a bed of sickness, with no one to give him a cup of cold water or cool his parched lips or to render him a single act of kindness. He has sailors, said my friends. I was silent, but thought to myself, a sailor is not a wife. On illnesses aboard her ship, she actually gets sick herself as they're first coming out before they arrive in Fiji. I lost all hope and began to think that it was my fate to be buried in the Indian Ocean. The feverish dreams that flitted across my imagination were those of being pendant in mid-ocean, of being devoured by sharks, or of wasting whole ages in rising and sinking in a world of waters. During this time, she observed her husband barely slept 2 hours and 24. On seeing her husband with new eyes on board her ship, if his gentleness and benevolence had won my heart, his fortitude and bravery in the most trying scenes excited my admiration. And, if I might be allowed to say it, my pride was raised that he was capable of taking care of others as well as myself. For I could see that the sailors were never discouraged. They had such confidence in their commander that they never thought of danger when he was with them. The more feeble we are, the more we confide in those who can protect us. It is impossible for a woman to understand the true character of her husband by only seeing him in the domestic circle. She must watch him in trying circumstances, and where she cannot be called to counsel and advise, to form a just estimate of his qualifications for the discharge of his public duties. Now, do you think the men who are on board this ship are writing things like this? About the measure of each other's character in such a way? No, it's winds west by northwest. Lost John Perkins overboard today. Joe was eaten by a shark. Right? So I will submit to you that although maybe not meant for publication originally, that a woman's perspective on board ship is often the most cutting and telling of all, because they're not really a part of the culture. They're just observing and watching, marking it down, right? Like a study in sociology, really. All right. Let's see. So there's a bit here that I want to talk about, and I think it's important. I do just want to kind of give everyone a little trigger warning first, because there's a lot of violence when it comes to interactions with the indigenous populations of these places. On both sides, a lot of miscommunication, of course, there's language barriers, but also cultural differences. And I think the fear of that is something that cannot be understated in this. Now, there was, a time during Abby's voyage where she is left behind in Manila and her husband carries on to get some other things from the Fiji Islands, bêche de mer, sandalwood, things like this. And they land on an island and are greeted by the indigenous population. There's a skirmish, and a number of the crew are killed on the beach. Those who can escape hightail it back to the ship, and they kind of get out of there with a plan to come back in a few months when they have more men and kind of see what's going on the island. Now, when they return, Abby is with them, and they actually come across a man who they thought had been killed in this original skirmish. His name is Leonard Shaw. And Leonard Shaw comes back on board ship and relates his experience, which is really gruesome. I'll try to be as gentle as I can be in this description, but it's quite intense. But I think it's important because once Abby hears this story from Leonard Shaw, she has nightmares about it for months. The crew members who maybe weren't on the beach with him, but who also heard this story, have to think about this, right? Because they're the ones who are going to get off the boat on the next island. And now, because they've heard this story, maybe their guard is up and they're a little bit more willing to engage in violence with the indigenous people right off the rip, right? As opposed to communicating, trying to understand one another. So he is attacked on the beach. He wakes up and runs into the tree line. He's hiding for a few days and finally says, I'm soaked through, I have to get out into the sun. And he goes out into the sun and encounters another indigenous person who clubs him over the head, drags him back into the woods, and leaves him for dead. He wakes up, still alive, and is so hungry he decides to look for some coconuts. He eats these coconuts, they keep him alive another 15 days, and then he says, I have to get some more food. He comes out of the jungle again and is met by another group of indigenous people in which he is so desperate he offers to become a slave to these people if they will let him live. They say, okay, come with us, we're going to take you to the chief. He's stripped naked and his shoes are removed and he is forced to walk along lava flow, so he's cut. Obviously, we're talking about a New England fella, so not much of a tan. That sunburn must have been horrific. He is prolonged, walked down to meet the chief, and the chief says, yes, you can be my slave, okay? He's put onto a boat and further tortured by younger members of the tribe who pull out his facial hair, his eyelashes, his eyebrows, and then they tell him he is about to be roasted and consumed. So he is on the beach, they are building the pyre, and they say, when the chief gets here, you're up. And the chief doesn't arrive. We don't know why. And within the next few days, before the chief can arrive, the Antarctic shows up and he's rescued. Okay? So, but just imagine what that man went through. Okay? Now you have to get back on board ship. You've got another 2 years ahead of you of service, right? There's no one to talk to about this. Mental health is a big problem on board these ships, and you see kind of the effects of that more and more and more the longer it goes on. Okay. So Mary is so great. She's so relatable, and I think it's because it was never meant for publication. She's a lot more honest and says things that are great. So this is, I think, one of the more striking, and this was the first one I tagged in the book because I love it so much. June 25th, 1846. Mary writes, the weather is damp and cloudy, when on deck, boats all off chasing whale. A large number in sight. Husband up masthead. I overheard him say to the cabin boy, William, fetch me my shoes. I looked and saw he had come down from aloft and was preparing to go in the remaining boat. He caught my eye and understood the expression, which was, don't go in the boat. But the world's, I must try my luck and lower away the boat, left me no hope. I am cheered tonight by the long sighs of my dear companion, who feels nearly discouraged. In vain have I attempted to calm his troubled mind, but he refuses to be comforted. Nothing but wails will cheer his disconsolate feelings. Now, a few weeks later, they catch their first whale. Thank goodness, right? Because you got to stay out as long as it takes to fill your boat, so let's get it going, right? Mary writes, I've been alone all day in my room sewing. Husband on deck attending to the try-pots, which for the first time are in operation, and the smoke from right whale blubber ascends the Tiger's rigging. All hands look happy and greasy. 2 men between decks in the blubber room with spades, cutting it up in pieces. 2 more stand by the hatch and take it to the tubs when full. Drag it forward, where stands a man with a mincing board and knife, where it is sliced up in small, thin pieces and put in the pots by a man who stands ready to pitch it in. One keeps constantly on the works to mind fire and to keep the oil from burning by constantly stirring and to dip it into the coolers when the pots get full. Cooper is busy fixing casks, which with the man at the wheel are all who are engaged when the boats are off. So just to put that in perspective, they're on a wooden ship in the middle of the North Pacific Ocean, processing a whale, which has spread its oil all over the ship deck, and they light a fire on the ship deck to render this fat, right? That's like you're asking for a disaster to happen, right? I mean, they're using this oil to burn lamps. It's extremely flammable. This is very high risk, high reward sort of work. So here's Mary talking about, just about a month later, her relationship with religion and how she's choosing to take that on as a childless woman in the 19th century. This afternoon, I've been reading the book entitled Women's Mission. Found much that was good and well worth treasuring up. One sentence in particular. All women had a mission to perform, and in all circumstances in life, it should be their aim to establish peace and love and unselfishness, to be achieved by any means and at any cost to themselves. In the cultivation first of themselves, then in all over whom they have any influence of an unselfish and unworldly spirit. In any way, in every way in which God and man can be served, it is theirs to sense, gracefully, peacefully, unostentatiously. So this is a way for Mary to kind of turn that maternal love that she should, quote unquote, be putting into her children, which she doesn't have, and saying, as a woman, the closest thing you can do in the eyes of God is to use that maternal love. And if it's not for children, for the other people in your life who need that guidance, right? And Mary says, I know just the people who could use that, and it's her people on board ship. She often refers to them as her little family as the trip goes on. They've become quite close. And she sees that as the role of the woman on board ship. This is her job, right? She's there to remind everyone of these things. Now, here we have a death up close and personal on board the Tiger. And there are a lot of these, but this I found really heartbreaking. So October 22nd, 1846, they're in Magdalena Bay in California. Mary and William had met up with the ship Atlantic of New London, and that was captained by a man named Mr. Beck, who had his wife along. Captain Beck was really sick, and Captain Beck's wife, Hannah, reached out to Mary and said, will you please come on board and just, Mary wanted to go. This woman's husband is sick. She must be just beside herself. So she goes, and Mary wants to help and says, you go and rest, Hannah. I'll sit up with your husband tonight. And this is what she writes. Found Mrs. Beck very much fatigued and her husband very sick and had been for the last 18 days. I felt very happy to meet with a female acquaintance, but feelings of sadness soon took away all the pleasure seeing Captain Beck so sick. I sat up with him in hopes that she would get some rest. The night seemed very long and lonesome. He slept a great part of the time. When awake, was in great distress, both in body and in mind. He truly was a sick man, and death was visible in his features. He could not see, and his eyes looked as though the light would be no more to him. God have mercy on me, was often uttered with every evidence of the most intense feeling. I thought, while sitting by his bedside, how dreadful and awful was death when approaching one who had no hope, all darkness beyond the tomb. After they left, Mary wrote, "Have been on deck the whole evening, feel lonely and sad, and though not with Mrs. Beck in body, her trouble is ever present in my mind." Mr. Beck died later the next day. His wife was put ashore in Oahu and told to wait for another ship that would agree to take her back to Stonington, however long that might be. So she waited a few months and took the ship Charles back home in November. But one night, as they were rounding Cape Horn, she threw herself out of her cabin window and was lost. Mary doesn't hear the news of this for another year. So Mary is left in Hawaii while her husband takes the Tiger north into the North Pacific. And she had to arrange her lodging and stay with strangers the whole time that her husband was not there, which, like, I'm not much on, maybe like a bed and breakfast sort of thing or a boarding house. But there are often times, depending on how many crews and how many ships are in, there's nowhere for them to stay. This is a big risk, right? She winds up okay for Mary. Let's see. 2 more for Mary. I'm trying to stay on time. I'm going to cut it. Okay. So this is what Mary writes in her journal as they finally are leaving the whaling grounds to come home to Stonington. It's been 3 years. Here we are, homeward bound. Home. What a variety of conflicting emotions rush up in the mind at the mention of this comprehensive word. Our thoughts involuntarily revert to the friends we've left, where are garnered up the earliest scenes of childhood and some of the heart's dearest recollections, and thoughts like these are continually crowding upon our minds. What changes have taken place since the shores of our native land receded from view? What friends estranged? What prospects blighted? Shall we ever reach that shore again, rendered doubly dear from separation and long absence? Hope and eager anticipation give buoyancy to our feelings, and with full force we can say in the word of the poet, "Onward, thou gallant ship, nor fear the raving tempest's wrath. Outrun it all and boldly steer upon thy homeward path." But Mary encounters one last real bad storm before they come home. And the storms, girl, you should read Mary Brewster's diary. It's amazing. So this is in February of 1848. They arrive back home around June of this year, okay? For a few moments, the wind blew so hard, I could not tell whether it was the wind or thunder. All hands was immediately on deck, and every effort was made to get the sail clewed up before it could be done. Main topsail was split, and mainsail blown to pieces, and all were fearful that the topmast or masts would go. I had no time for fear, being interested with all that was going on outside till I heard the sound, "Mary, go below." Then I knew that there was danger in the deep. I was not long in obeying summons like these. Left dishes rattling and things all sprawling in the house and made out to get below. There I found confusion and disorder. The lamp had taken a trip and turned over oil all out. Dishes had fallen and broken, which with the water pouring a stream into the cabin windows was sufficient to not dissipate all alarm. At 9 this eve, stars are showing and the sea roaring. My thoughts have wandered to the dear church in Stonington, where I imagine are met together the little band with whom I have oftenly met. In their prayers, I feel at times absent members are remembered, and in the number I have a share in their petitions. Pray on, brethren and sisters, for prayer will be heard and answered. Though far distant from you, I trust in spirit we meet around the mercy seat. I mean, right?
This church?
No, Mary's part of the Baptist church. Sorry, not this church, but it's a nice sentiment we can all share right now, right? All right, Sarah Fanning's the last one I'm going to talk about, and she's got less quotes because she was in China, and mostly she was just describing the things she's seeing, which is lovely, but I want to show you the fun stuff. So I have one really long entry from Sarah, and this is one of my favorites. So I don't know, how many people have crossed the equator in a ship? Okay. Did you do a ceremony when you crossed the equator? Did they shave your head? No? Yeah. You shaved yours?
No, but you have to clip your hair.
Yeah, they clip your hair. Okay. So In the 1840s, you would be presented to Neptune, which is a sort of like play they would do on board ship. I'm going to read you Sarah's explanation of this. But I do want to say that this is unusual for a woman to see this. When Mary is on board the Tiger, her husband says, "No Neptune, we're not doing any sort of celebrating when we cross the equator. I don't want my wife to see this." So nothing happens on the Tiger when they cross the equator. But on Captain Nat's ship, this is what Sarah, his niece, observes. Okay, this is awful. Here we go. About 9 o'clock, we heard his pistol, the forerunner of his Majesty's appearance. Mr. Lowe then replied by firing the big gun. It made quite an explosion. Neptune and train then advanced. He had on a long calico robe with a broad belt of sheepskin painted, a four-sided helmet or crown with long manila hemp for hair and beard. His hands, arms, feet, legs, etc., all painted. In his hand, he carried the grains. In parentheses, she has, unfortunately, they had 4 points instead of 3. So she knows he's supposed to have a trident, right? Not 4, not a fork. So he had a fish stuck in this 4-pointed trident as well. His attendants were a barber's assistant, and 2 constables. The barber had bare legs and arms, all painted, a helmet-shaped thing made of canvas on his head with long points falling behind them. His assistant was dressed in canvas with a sheepskin headdress. But oh, the constables! They looked as if they had come straight from the infernal regions, face painted brilliant red and black canvases around them painted horridly. They soon proceeded to business. An immense tub, filled with water on a board across one side, was the seat prepared for the victims. The boys had all been sent below immediately, and Neptune called for them in order. The constables were sent to seek them. First they appeared bringing the cook led between them, with hands tied behind him and eyes blindfolded. He was seated on the board, and then the barber commenced operations. He had a pail of tar and slough and an immense brush with which he lathered the face well. Then that was scraped off with a razor. An immense piece of iron, about ½ an inch, which was filed down a little. Then after that operation was complete, a barrel of salt water was thrown over him by some sailors perched on the side of the ship for just that purpose, and so on with each one in succession. Neptune would propound questions to the sufferer, and as he opened his mouth to reply, the barber, who stood ready to chuck his nasty brush into their mouth. Oh, yeah. Each boy shared the same fate till they came to Augustus Van Cortlandt, and all seemed to have a peak against him. So we expected he would be obliged to undergo more, but he was let off as easy as any. But I will describe the operation more particularly, and it will serve for all. The constables led him up, having previously painted his face red and black. He was seated on the plant. Neptune said, "What is your name?" "Augustus Van Cortlandt." The barber commenced lathering. Neptune said, "How old are you?" 18. The barber took that opportunity to introduce his nauseous brush between the teeth. Neptune, will you swear never to walk when you can ride, provided you do not prefer walking? Yes. Speak louder, son, I cannot hear you. Yes. There, give him the speaking trumpet. I cannot hear his reply. The trumpet was held to his mouth, and as he opened his mouth to reply, a bucket full of salt water was dumped down the trumpet. The barber then opened the boy's mouth to clean his teeth and rubbed them with a fingerful of tar. Oh, the poor fellow spit. Damn it, said the shaver. Damn it, do you spit in the barber's face? He then combed his hair with an immense instrument manufactured for the occasion. When these inflictions were over, they took him by the heels and upset him into the cask, while the men poured the barrel of salt water over it, and he was declared to be initiated and a true son of Neptune. Captain Nat declares this day a holiday on board the ship, and the men are given grog. A fiddle is brought out, and they are waltzing and jigging on board like there's no tomorrow. However, Sarah is not allowed to dance with the crew members, so she can only watch. So 2 more quotes from Sarah. Okay, this is one of Sarah's storms she experienced on board. Now, she's in a different area of the world. They're through kind of the Indian Ocean at this point. May 25th, 1846. In the afternoon, Aunt Eliza and I were sitting in the transom reading when the steward came to shut deadlights for the first time since we left New York. A gale was rising, and the sea was so high. Oh, how beautiful the waves looked, curling and foaming after us. Soon after the deadlights were closed, the storm commenced. The ship rolled heavily. I went up the companionway to catch the storm. Oh, how wild! The wind blowing very fresh, the waves dashing and surging, and rain pouring in torrents, while above the roar of the elements was heard Uncle Nat's voice giving his orders. The sails were all reefed, most of them taken in, and we were scuttling along almost under bare poles. I was well soaked and came down, put on Uncle Nat's India rubber cloak, and again went up. It looked so terrible, so wild. The bare decks wet and slippery, sailors, some high up in the rigging, reefing sail, others standing round in their oilskin coverings. But to me there was nothing dreary in the whistling of the wind through the cordage. It told of strife, and conflict is never dreary. The war of elements. Come on, Sarah. Take it easy. All right. I want to make one more point about Sarah Fanning, and that is to, as you can see, right, these women are a lot more modern than maybe you would imagine them to have been if you say these women went whaling in 1845, right? They're very relatable. Sarah's sort of an early feminist. She's really bored on board ship, and unlike most people, she gained weight on her journey, and she's constantly complaining about having to let out her dresses, and she's getting quite fat from how good the food is. But she's bored. She spends most of her time reading and studying, but she's also thinking. So she talks at some length about the misguided attempt of men and women to work hard for material goods when they neglect to cultivate their minds. This is especially true for women, in Sarah's opinion. She writes, "Let her reform not by public speeches, not by quitting her domestic circle, not by leaving her proper sphere, not by directing her mind to higher pursuits. Oh, educate women. Give her nobler tastes. Let her feel that she is born for better things than to oversee her household, that her soul was given for a nobler use than to bind it with the chains of fashion and display. If when the husband comes home, tired, he finds his wife ready to sit with him, to converse, to read to him, to share his nobler thoughts, will it not bind him more closely to her and his home than if he is dragged to the ball or the theater, or wearied with endless complaints, harangues upon the trouble of servants, the last new fashion, the splendid parties of Mrs. So-and-so? Oh, I could dream so of such a home. Intelligent children, intellectual friends. But what am I? Who? Nobody. Ignorant. Helpless. A woman." So, what are we talking about in summation here? I mentioned at the beginning of this dedication, bravery, sacrifice. Most women who accompanied their husbands from New England they were one and done, as I like to say, right? Went on one and said, never again, I'm all set. Mary spent 3 years on the Tiger with her husband. They came home and spent 3 months and 2 weeks in Stonington, and then she was ready to get right back on the boat with her husband, and she sailed again with him. Eliza went on multiple trips with her husband, Captain Palmer, to China, to South America, very early in their relationship and later. I didn't talk as much about Eliza because there aren't diaries, and she wasn't really a prolific letter writer about her experience, where I really wanted some firsthand account to share with you, right straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So it's not an easy feat to go to sea and remain healthy. It's not an easy feat to go to sea and survive. I mean, quite honestly. So this is a really incredible chance that they're taking, right? Not only that they might be shunned by the people who love them at home and the only community that they know when they come back, but that they might not make it back. Or if they come home, people they love may have died and they had no idea, right? This is a huge leap of faith, of love, really. And like I said, this is just a sampling of the women in New England who went with their husbands a whaling. I would recommend any of Joan Druitt's books if anyone's interested in this. I would highly recommend Mary Brewster's. She was a sister sailor. It was published by the Seaport, I think about 1990, but you can find copies of it online. It's an excellent read. And we have Sarah Fanning's Who Quad journals transcribed. That's available for anyone to come and look at if you'd like at the Woolworth Library. And you don't have to worry about the cursive because we've typed it for you. And I just wanted to say, again, that I think a woman's perspective is extremely insightful in this particular instance because they know what's going on, right? Because they're associated with whaling through their husbands or through trade with their husbands, but to see it and live it as a woman is very different. And thank goodness they put pen to paper. So thank you all so much for having me tonight. I appreciate it. Oh, questions? Okay, yeah. Sorry. Does anyone have any questions? Mary Brewster did not have children, but Eliza Palmer did not have children. Sarah Fanning did, and Abby Morell did as well. June?